She was paid to pretend she loved him. She never expected to mean it. Nia Brooke spent 3 years watching Kang Min-jae from across a desk, close enough to see the coldness in his eyes, close enough to know exactly how dangerous loving him would be. When he offered her money to play his girlfriend for 1 week, she told herself it was a transaction. Clean, temporary, survivable. She was wrong about all three, because the man who bought her presents never expected what she'd cost him in return. If you're new here, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came down hard on Gangnam that Tuesday night, the kind of rain that made the whole district look like a smear of neon bleeding into black pavement. Nia Brooke stood in the elevator of the Kang Tower's executive floor, watching the floor numbers climb, her reflection staring back at her from the polished steel doors like a woman she didn't fully recognize. She was still in her work clothes. Navy blazer, sensible flats, her natural hair pinned back in the way she always kept it during office hours. Contained, professional, invisible. She'd been halfway to the subway when her phone buzzed with a message that contained exactly 4 words. Come to my penthouse. No explanation. No context. Just the summons, the way Min-jae always issued them, flat and absolute, as if the possibility of refusal had simply never occurred to him. She should have gone home. That was the thought she'd had standing on the curb in the rain, water already soaking into the seams of her shoes. She should have gone home, made tea, called her brother Marcus, and pretended that the message hadn't made her heart do something embarrassing in her chest. Instead, she turned around and come back inside. 3 years of working for Kang Min-jae had apparently rewired something fundamental in her judgment. The elevator opened to a private lobby she'd only been in twice before. Floor-to-ceiling windows. No artwork on the walls because Min-jae didn't believe in decoration that served no purpose. A single assistant sitting behind a sleek desk who nodded at her without speaking and gestured toward the double doors at the end of the hall. Nia walked. She kept her chin level and her breathing measured, and she tried very hard not to think about the fact that it was almost 10 o'clock at night and she was walking into her boss's private apartment because he'd sent her 4 words on a phone. She pushed open the door. The penthouse was lit the way Min-jae preferred it, dim, controlled, the kind of darkness that felt intentional rather than neglected. Seoul spread out through the glass walls like a circuit board of light, the Han River a dark ribbon cutting through all that illumination. The rain streaked the windows in long diagonal lines. He was standing at the far end of the room with his back to her. Kang Min-jae in person was something Nia had never fully gotten used to, despite 3 years of daily proximity. He was tall, not absurdly so, but enough that he commanded space without effort. His shoulders were set with the particular tension of a man who had never fully learned to stand anywhere without remaining ready for something. He wore a dress shirt, collar open now, the jacket discarded somewhere, and his hands were in his trouser pockets in the way they always were when he was working through a problem he hadn't yet solved. She'd learned to read his posture the way other people read faces. Close the door, he said, without turning around. She closed it. Sit down. There was a low sectional sofa arranged near the windows. Nia sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited, because that was another thing 3 years had taught her. That with Min-jae, the fastest path through any conversation was to let him reach the point himself. Rushing him produced walls. Waiting produced, eventually, the actual thing he meant to say. He turned around. His face was unreadable in the way it usually was. Dark eyes, the clean architectural lines of his features carrying no particular expression. He looked at her for a moment in silence, and Nia had the familiar, uncomfortable experience of wondering what exactly he saw when he looked at her. You remember my grandmother, he said. Kang Sun-hee, Nia said. Matriarch. 80 years old this month. She controls the family trust, and everyone in the family is afraid of her. Something shifted briefly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Just an acknowledgement. Her birthday is in 3 weeks. The family is gathering at the estate on Jeju Island for 10 days. I know. I arranged the travel logistics. 7 aircraft, 14 hotel rooms for the extended family arriving from... I told my family I have a girlfriend. Nia stopped. She looked at him. He held her gaze without apparent discomfort, which was infuriating. You, she said carefully, told your family. 3 months ago, when my grandmother threatened to arrange a marriage meeting with the Huang family's eldest daughter. He moved away from the window and sat across from her in the low armchair, his posture unchanged, spine straight, hands resting with deliberate calm on the arms of the chair. I told her I was already in a serious relationship, that the woman was important to me, and I would bring her to Jeju to meet the family at the birthday celebration. The rain hit the windows. Nia processed this. And this woman, she said, this serious, important girlfriend, doesn't exist. Right. Which presents a problem. She stared at him. She was aware of something moving through her that she was carefully not naming, something that had been quietly building for 3 years and which chose this specific moment to make itself felt in ways she found deeply inconvenient. Mr. Kang, she said. Min Jae. You want me to... I'm asking you to accompany me to Jeju Island for 1 week as my girlfriend. He said it the same way he might announce a quarterly earnings projection. Level, certain, as if the strangeness of the request was simply not a variable he was accounting for. The family is perceptive, and my grandmother in particular does not miss detail. This would require a convincing performance. Full commitment for the duration of the trip. Nia opened her mouth, closed it. I'd also like to begin public appearances in Seoul prior to departure, he continued. Approximately 2 weeks. Enough to establish a visible record before any of the family attempts to research the relationship independently. You've already thought all of this through. Yes. Of course you have. He reached inside the breast pocket of his discarded jacket, which was draped over the end of the sofa beside her, and withdrew a folded envelope. He placed it on the cushion between them. She didn't touch it. The amount inside is sufficient to cover Marcus's remaining treatment costs, he said. Everything in Nia went very still. Marcus. Her younger brother. 24 years old and 18 months into a medical crisis that had consumed every dollar she'd managed to save over the last 5 years of her career. And still the balance kept growing, and still the hospital kept sending letters and envelopes she'd learned not to open late at night when she was alone. She hadn't told Min Jae about Marcus. She'd been careful about that. Careful about keeping her personal life separate from the professional one, keeping the two compartments sealed because if he knew how badly she needed the job, how badly she needed the income, then she would owe him something she didn't know how to quantify. How do you know about Marcus? She said. Not a question, more like a statement she needed to let finish forming. I'm thorough, he said. You investigated me. I investigate everyone with access to my operations. That's not new information. You investigated me, and then you waited, and now you're... She stopped, pressed her lips together. There was anger moving underneath the surface of her composure, and she let it settle before she spoke again, because Nia Brooks had learned a long time ago that anger without direction was just noise. You're using it, right now. You're sitting there and you're using it as leverage. He didn't flinch. He also didn't deny it. I'm offering a transaction, he said. You provide a service. I solve a problem you can't currently solve on your own. Both parties receive something they need. Don't. Nia, don't make it sound clean. She looked at him straight on, because that was the one thing she'd always refused to give up in his presence. The directness, the refusal to drop her eyes the way people in his world generally learn to do. If you're going to ask me to do something that puts me in a position I can't easily get out of, at least have the decency to call it what it is. Silence stretched between them. And then, for just a moment, something passed through his expression that she couldn't categorize. It was there and gone too fast to name. Something that looked almost like discomfort, or recognition, or something else entirely that she didn't have a word for. You're right, he said quietly. She hadn't expected that. I'm asking you to do something that requires more from you than a typical professional arrangement, he said, and I'm offering compensation that is calculated to be difficult to refuse because I need you to say yes. That is manipulation. I'm aware of it. Nia sat with that for a moment. At least you're honest about it, she said finally. I try to be, about the things that matter. She looked at the envelope on the cushion between them. She thought about Marcus in his hospital room 3 weeks ago, the way he'd tried to crack a joke when she walked in because he'd always been the one who made things lighter, even when he was the one carrying the heaviest weight. She thought about the letters she hadn't opened, the phone calls from the billing department she'd learned to let go to voicemail. She thought about 1 week, 7 days. Pretending. What exactly would it involve? She said. 1 week at the Jeju estate. Separate rooms, but shared appearances, meals with the family, the birthday gala, basic physical contact appropriate to a genuine couple, hand-holding in public, natural proximity. Nothing beyond that unless you're comfortable with it. He paused. 2 weeks of public appearances in Seoul prior to departure. Dinner, a few events, enough for the city to notice. Your family will look me up. Yes, I'm your secretary. Executive secretary, there's a difference. Min Jae. She said his name directly, the way he'd asked her to, and she watched him register it. Your family is going to know exactly who I am within 48 hours of being told about me. They'll know I work for you. They'll know everything about my background, my family, my finances. They'll know I'm not... She stopped. Not what? She looked at him. Not what they're expecting. He held her gaze. No, he agreed. You're not. The words sat in the air between them, and she couldn't entirely determine what he meant by them, which was the problem with Kang Min-jae in every context. The meanings were layered, and the surface was always unreliable. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. And I need to call Marcus first. Of course. She stood. She picked up the envelope, not to accept it, just to hold it, because she wasn't willing to leave it on his sofa. And she walked to the door of the penthouse. Nia. She turned. He was still seated, but he was watching her with an expression she didn't recognize, and it put a strange weight in her chest. Whatever you decide, he said. Your position here is not at risk. She nodded once and left. She held it together through the private lobby and through the elevator and through the marble expanse of the ground floor lobby and all the way out to the street where the rain was still falling. She stood on the wet pavement outside Kang Tower with the envelope in her hand and the city glittering around her and her chest doing something complicated and structural. Then she opened the envelope. She looked at the number written on the paper inside. The number was enough to cover Marcus's treatment. All of it. Everything still outstanding, with enough remaining that she wouldn't have to think about money for a year. She stood in the rain for a long time. Then she called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, groggy but alert in the way sick people learn to be, always half listening for something to change. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. How are you feeling? Same as yesterday. Marginally less terrible. The night nurse brought me an extra pudding cup so the universe is basically balanced. A pause. Nia, it's 10:30. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You only call this late when something's wrong. You've done it twice since I've been in here, and both times something was very wrong. She closed her eyes. The rain hit her face, and her blazer was soaked through now, and she didn't move. My boss asked me to do something, she said. Something weird? Something complicated. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Complicated like legally complicated, or complicated like emotionally complicated? Both, probably. Is the money good? She laughed, and it came out rawer than she intended, more feeling in it than she'd meant to release on a sidewalk in the rain. Marcus, she said. Nia. His voice changed. Quieter now. The humor pulled back. Whatever it is, you don't owe me your life. You know that, right? You know I've never wanted that. I know, she said. Then do it or don't do it because of what it costs you, not because of me. She looked at the envelope in her hand. Yeah, she said. Okay. She called Min-jae at 11:15. He picked up immediately. Yes, she said when he answered. A pause. Brief. All right. I have conditions. Tell me. Separate rooms. Always. I don't care what story we tell your family. I need a space that's mine. She kept her voice level. Professional. The voice she used in boardrooms when she needed something done correctly. No physical contact beyond what's necessary to be convincing. I decide what's necessary, not you. And when this is over, we go back to what we were. Clean line, no ambiguity. Agreed. All three. Agreed. All three. She exhaled. Then I'll see you Monday morning. We should probably start figuring out a story. Yes. Another brief pause. Nia. What? Get out of the rain. She looked up, looked at the tower above her, at the dark glass of the penthouse floor far above. She wondered if he could see her from up there, a small figure standing in the middle of all that wet light. Good night, Mr. Kang, she said deliberately. She heard something that might, in another man, have been a quiet exhale of amusement. Good night, he said. She hung up. She hailed a cab. She rode home through the rain-slicked streets of Gangnam, and she told herself the tightness in her throat was exhaustion and relief about the money and nothing else. She was good at telling herself things. Monday arrived, and with it the full weight of what she'd agreed to. Nia walked into the executive floor at 8:15, which was early enough that most of the staff hadn't arrived yet, and found Min Jae already at his desk with a file open in front of him and a cup of coffee that had clearly been poured and forgotten. He didn't look up when she came in, which was normal. She set her bag down at her workstation, poured herself coffee from the machine by the window, and stood at his office doorway. "The Huang deal closes Friday," she said. "You have a call with the Tokyo office at 9, a site visit to the Apgujeong property at 2, and the foundation board meeting has been moved to Thursday afternoon." Noted. He turned a page in the file. "Sit down." She came in and sat across the desk. He looked up then, and there was something different in his attention, a focused quality she recognized from negotiations, the particular way he looked at a problem he was actively solving. "I've prepared a brief," he said, and slid a folder across the desk. She opened it. Inside was a document, clean, organized, the way he organized everything. It contained a story, the story of how they'd met, how they'd started spending time together outside the office, how the relationship had developed over the past several months. It was plausible, specific, internally consistent. It had the texture of something real. It also described her with a precision that stopped her mid-page. "You wrote this yourself," she said. "Yes." "It says, I'm the only person in the office who disagrees with you when you're wrong." He didn't respond. "It says," she looked up, "it says I make you eat when you forget, that I figured out you skip lunch when a deal is going badly and started bringing food in from that Vietnamese place on Tehran Row without telling you why." The silence in the office had a specific quality. "Min Jae." Her voice was careful. "This isn't cover story material. Your grandmother is going to ask when we first noticed each other, and I can tell her we were introduced at a company function and things developed over time. I don't need—" She stopped. "You don't need to know all of this for this to work." He looked at her steadily. "The details make it convincing. Some of these details aren't things you'd know unless you'd been paying closer attention than I realized." Something shifted in his jaw, barely perceptible. "I pay attention to people I trust," he said. "You don't trust anyone." "I trust very few people," he corrected. "That isn't the same thing." She looked down at the document. Her finger rested on the line about the Vietnamese food on Tehran Row. She thought about the first time she'd done that, 14 months ago, after a shipping deal in Busan had fallen through and she'd watched him go cold and mechanical in the way he went when something was pulling at him that he refused to examine. She'd walked in with the food and set it on the corner of his desk without a word and walked out. And he'd never once mentioned it. She'd assumed he hadn't noticed. The document suggested otherwise. "All right," she said and closed the folder. "We should discuss delivery," he said. "How we carry ourselves. Tone." "I know how couples behave." "You know how people behave," he said. "I'm less certain I do." It was an oddly honest thing for him to say. She looked at him, and he held her gaze and didn't retreat from the admission, and she found that disarming in a way that was dangerous for reasons she refused to examine at 8:20 on a Monday morning. "You've had relationships before," she said. "I've had arrangements." He said it plainly, without apparent self-pity. "They serve purposes. The dynamic between us will need to look different from that." "Different how? Like I chose you." He said it flatly, as if reading from a script, but his eyes didn't match the flatness. "Like you were the choice, not the circumstance." The morning light came in through the office windows at a low angle and landed across his desk, and Nia sat there across from Kang Min Jae and thought about the 3 years she'd spent in this building, in this room, watching this man carry the weight of his empire with the kind of discipline that looked from a distance like coldness, and looked up close like someone who had learned never to put anything down because he didn't trust the world not to take it. "I think," she said carefully, "that we should practice being in the same room without it being about work." He nodded. "That means dinner," she said. "Not a briefing. Dinner where we talk about things that aren't the company. That can be arranged. And it means—" She paused. "You need to actually look at me when we're in public, not through me, not past me. At me." He met her eyes. "I'm looking at you now," he said. She was aware abruptly of the particular quality of silence that had settled in the room. "You are," she said. She stood up, picked up the folder, pressed it against her chest. "Thursday night," she said. "Dinner. Somewhere that's not this building. I'll make a reservation. Somewhere normal," she said. "Not a private room in a 4-star restaurant. Somewhere we might actually run into people." His eyes narrowed slightly. Not displeasure. Recalibration. All right, he said. She went back to her desk. She sat down. She put the folder in her drawer. She opened her email and found 17 messages waiting, and she worked through them with the same efficiency she applied to every morning, because the work was still the work and the structure of it was steadying. But 3 times in the next hour, she caught herself looking at the office doorway. And once, just once, she looked up to find him looking back. The dinner was on Thursday. They went to a small restaurant in Mapo, the kind of place that had been there for 30 years. Dark wood and floor cushions, and the smell of doenjang jjigae and maggioli. Not the sort of place where anyone from Gangnam came unless they were trying very hard not to be seen being themselves. Nia got there first, which was deliberate. She wanted to be seated when he arrived, to have a moment to settle herself before the thing started. She'd worn a deep burgundy dress, something she actually liked wearing, not something she'd chosen for a performance. She'd let her hair out. She was nervous, and she was refusing to be nervous, which was approximately the same as being nervous, but with more effort. He walked in at 7:30 exactly. He'd made an effort too. Dark clothes, no tie, a jacket that looked like something a person might actually wear to dinner rather than to command a boardroom. He looked different out of the office, less armored somehow. Or maybe the armor was there but distributed differently. He crossed the restaurant and sat down across from her. A beat passed. "Hi," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Hi." The server came. They ordered. And then they sat across from each other in a small restaurant in Mapo on a Thursday night, and the silence that stretched between them was not comfortable exactly, but it was not entirely uncomfortable either, which was already different from what she'd expected. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she said. He looked at her. "That's the exercise," she said. "We're supposed to be in a relationship. You'd know things about me. I'd know things about you." She wrapped both hands around her water glass. "So, something I don't know." He thought about it. She watched him actually think about it, which was unusual. Min-jae generally spoke with the confidence of a man who had already prepared his answers. But this seemed to require genuine search. "I had a dog when I was 9, he said finally. "A mutt. Found it behind a warehouse in Incheon." "What happened to it?" "It died when I was 12. I cried for 3 days, and then I decided I wasn't going to let myself do that again." The directness of it caught her off guard. There was no performance in it, no softening, no attempt to shape the vulnerability into something more palatable. He just said it, with that same flat precision he applied to everything, and then he looked at her steadily as if daring her to respond with anything less than the same directness. "My father left when I was 10, she said. Marcus was 7. My mother worked 2 jobs for the next 8 years and never once complained about it in front of us. I used to think that made her strong. When I got older, I started wondering if it just meant she didn't have anyone to complain to." He looked at her. "What do you think now?" "I think both things are probably true." He nodded. The food arrived. They ate. The conversation moved. Not smoothly, not the way conversation moved between people who had learned to be comfortable with each other, but steadily, with that particular friction of 2 people who are each accustomed to keeping their interior lives tightly managed and are finding, with some surprise, that the management costs them something. They talked about Marcus without her planning to, and Min-jae listened with the full attention he brought to operational briefings. Nothing distracted, nothing performing interest, just present. He asked about the treatment, the timeline, the doctors. He asked questions that made her understand he'd already read everything in whatever file his people had assembled about her family, but was asking anyway because he wanted to know how she talked about it, not just the facts. "He's going to be fine," she said, and she heard the way her voice carried its own refutation. "He has to be." "Yes," Min-jae said. Not a reassurance, just an agreement. The 2 of them sitting across from each other in a restaurant in Mapo with the weight of that sentence occupying the space between them. She looked at her hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." The betrayal. She looked up. "You mentioned once, in a meeting, it wasn't to me, you were on the phone. You said something about the reason you don't put names on the operation documents. You said it was because someone had used your name against you." She paused. "What happened?" The quality of the silence changed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My former partner. We built the Incheon network together when I was 26. He looked at his glass. "He was the first person I had ever trusted completely. Like a brother." A beat. He sold the network's route information to a rival group. 11 people died in the shipment breach. Nia was very still. He sold it for enough money to leave the country, Minjay continued, his voice unchanged, that same flat precision she was beginning to understand, the way he carried unbearable things without letting them show. I found him 6 weeks later. She didn't ask what happened after that. He looked up and found her looking at him, and something moved across his face. Not the practiced blankness she usually saw, but something underneath it, something with more texture and less control. That's why, he said quietly. Why I don't. Why I can't. I know, she said. She reached across the table. She didn't plan it. It wasn't a conscious decision or a performance or part of any strategy. She just reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly, just a moment, just the pressure of her palm over his knuckles, and then pulled back. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She picked up her glass and took a sip and said, "We should work on the backstory timeline. Your sister Yeon is going to ask how you asked me out." He was quiet for a moment. "I asked you to stay late," he said slowly, "after a board meeting in October. I told you the filing system needed reorganizing. It didn't. I just wanted to talk to you. I didn't know how else to do it." She looked at him. "Is that the story?" she said carefully. "Yes," he said. "Okay," she said. She didn't ask if it was actually true. Neither did she tell him that she'd stayed until 11 that night, going through files that were already perfectly organized, and she'd known they were organized when she started, and she'd stayed anyway. The 2 weeks before, Jeju moved through her like weather. Not gradual, not predictable, but with the kind of forward momentum that made her lose track of the individual days. They were photographed together 4 times in 11 days. The first was at a restaurant in Cheongdam, high profile enough to guarantee at least one photo that would circulate in the right circles. Minjay had his hand at the small of her back as they walked in, and the warmth of it through the fabric of her coat was something she spent the entire meal telling herself to stop thinking about. The second was at an outdoor gallery opening where his hand found hers in the middle of a crowd and held it for 45 minutes, and she talked to a sculptor about texture and material, and she was reasonably certain she made no sense at all. The third was at the Kang Tower lobby one morning when she arrived to find him already downstairs, unusual, and he'd handed her a coffee from the cart on the corner without explaining how he'd known she'd be there. And a journalist who covered Seoul's business community had been passing and had photographed it, and later she would see the image online and understand why it spread the way it did. They didn't look like a man and his employee. They looked like 2 people in the middle of a Tuesday morning who were glad to be in the same place. The fourth was at a benefit dinner where he introduced her to 3 separate people as Naya, someone very important to me, and each time he said it, she had to concentrate on keeping her expression at the right temperature. Between the public appearances, there was work. Still the work, still the emails and the logistics and the quarterly reports and the conference calls, because Minjay's empire did not pause for anything, including whatever they were currently doing to each other in the spaces around it. But there were also evenings, small things. He started texting her at odd hours, not about work. A photograph of a restaurant in Itaewon with the message, "Is this normal?" which turned out to be the Vietnamese place on Tehran Row. She'd stared at the image for a full minute before writing back, "It's the one I get your lunch from," and his response had been a silence of 6 minutes followed by "I know," and she'd had to put her phone down and walk to the window and breathe for a moment. He asked her once, on a Wednesday evening when she'd stayed late to finish briefing materials and found him still there, how she'd first realized she liked doing work that other people found overwhelming. "Because I'm good at it," she'd said, surprised into honesty. "I've spent my whole life being the person who apologizes for taking up space. In this job, I get to be the person who manages the space, who knows where everything is and what needs to happen and why." She'd paused. "It's the only place I ever feel like I'm exactly the right size." He'd looked at her for a long time after that. "You don't need to apologize for taking up space," he'd said. She hadn't known what to say to that, so she'd said nothing. On the Friday before they were scheduled to depart for Jeju, a black car pulled up in front of her apartment building at 7 in the evening. She'd looked out her window and not expected it, and she'd gone down in her house clothes, oversized sweater, loose pants, her hair completely undone, and found Minjay standing beside the car with 2 paper bags from a night market stall. "What are you doing here?" she said. "You forgot to eat today." He held up the bags. "I noticed." You noticed. Yes. She looked at him. He stood on her sidewalk in Mapo, which was nowhere near Gangnam, in the Friday evening traffic noise, holding street food in paper bags, looking like a man who was faintly aware he'd done something that might be questioned and had decided to stand behind it anyway. She stepped aside and let him in. They ate on her floor because her kitchen table was covered in boxes she'd been meaning to reorganize for 4 months. She had no idea how the conversation went, the directions it went. She remembered telling him something about the summer she was 16 that she'd never told anyone, and he told her something about his mother that sat in the room with them like a third presence, still and heavy. She fell asleep at some point, not deeply, just the kind of sideways drift that happened when she was exhausted and warm and in the presence of something that felt, against all logic, safe. She woke up, and he was still sitting there, her living room around him, and he was looking at her. "You should have woken me," she said. "You needed to sleep." She sat up, pushed her hair out of her face. The bags from the night market were folded neatly on her coffee table. Outside the window, Seoul was doing its Friday night things, and she was sitting on her floor across from Kong Min-jae, and she felt, not for the first time but more clearly than before, the precise shape of what she was in danger of. Min-jae? Yes. In 2 weeks, she stopped, started again. "When this is over." We agreed. Clean line. He looked at her without speaking. "I just need you to still be able to do that," she said. "Because I'm not sure I can if—" She pressed her lips together. "I need to know you can still draw the line." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. The honesty of it hit her somewhere deep. "Then we might have a problem," she said softly. "Yes," he said. "We might." He left 20 minutes later. She stood in her doorway and watched the black car pull away, and she stood there long after it had gone, the city noise around her, and she pressed her forehead against the door frame and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, they would begin packing. In 4 days, they would land on Jeju Island, and whatever was happening between them, this slow, terrifying, irreversible thing they had both apparently decided to stop pretending wasn't happening, was going with them. She didn't know yet what it would cost her. She was beginning to suspect the answer was everything. The flight to Jeju left at 6 in the morning. Nia was at the private terminal at 5:40 with 2 carry-on bags, her coat buttoned to the throat, and approximately 3 hours of sleep that had done nothing except give her enough rest to feel the full weight of what she was doing. The terminal was small and clean and lit with the specific cold brightness of early morning, and there were 3 members of Min-jae's security team already stationed at the perimeter in the particular way they stationed themselves, visible enough to deter, quiet enough not to announce. Min-jae was already there. He was standing near the window with a phone at his ear, speaking in low-clipped Korean, and he turned when she came through the door and something crossed his face, brief, gone almost before it registered, that she filed away without examining. He ended the call. "You slept," he said. "Some." He looked at her carry-on bags. "That's everything?" "I pack efficiently. My sister Yeon will try to take you shopping within the first 24 hours. I'll manage." He nodded. He was back to the office version of himself this morning. Controlled, contained, all the edges of Thursday night folded back into the places he kept them. She understood the instinct. She was doing the same thing. They boarded. The plane was small, private, and they sat across a narrow aisle from each other for the 1-hour flight. She read. He worked. At some point over the water, he said, without looking up from his laptop, "My grandmother will ask you within the first hour how we met. She'll do it casually. Don't let the casualness fool you." "I know the story." "She'll probe the edges of it." "I know." He looked up. "If she catches something inconsistent, she won't say so immediately. She'll store it and use it later." Min-jae, Nia looked at him over her book. "I've been managing difficult people since I was 19 years old. I will be fine." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "you will." He went back to his laptop. She went back to her book and read the same paragraph 4 times. The Kong family estate sat on the northeastern coast of Jeju, perched at the edge of basalt cliffs above the East China Sea. The approach by car from the airport gave her 20 minutes of increasingly dramatic landscape, the volcanic rock dark and brutal against the green, the sea visible in flashes between the coastal trees, the sky the particular pale blue of early morning over water, and then the gates and the driveway and the house itself. It was not what she'd expected. She'd expected cold, something that matched the Gangnam offices, all glass and statement architecture. Instead, it was low and wide and built into the landscape, traditional in its bones with modern additions, surrounded by old trees that the wind moved through with a sound like breathing. It looked, against all her expectations, like somewhere a family actually lived. Min-jae watched her face as the car pulled in. "It was my grandfather's," he said. "He built it before any of the money." "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "My grandmother has never left it for longer than 6 weeks. She says everything she needs is here." The car stopped. The door opened. And before Nia could organize herself, the front doors of the house opened and a woman descended the stone steps at a pace that suggested she'd been watching the driveway. Kang Sun-hee was 80 years old and built like something ancient and essential. Small in frame, upright in spine, with white hair pulled back in a precise knot and eyes that were doing immediate, comprehensive work. She wore a linen hanbok in deep blue, and she moved with the particular authority of a person who had never in their adult life entered a room expecting anything other than full attention. She came down the steps and stopped in front of Nia. The moment stretched. "So," Sun-hee said, in Korean that Min-jae quietly translated, though Nia understood more than she let on. "This is the woman." "Grandmother," Min-jae said. "I'm speaking to her, not to you." She looked at Nia with a directness that was nearly physical, then switching to English, precise and slightly formal. "You have good posture. That tells me something." "Thank you," Nia said. "You have extraordinary eyes. That tells me something too." Silence. Then Sun-hee looked at her grandson with an expression Nia couldn't fully read. "She'll do," she said, and turned and walked back inside. Min-jae exhaled beside her, barely perceptible. "That went well," Nia murmured. "She didn't interrogate you on the steps," he said. "Yes, that went well." Oh. The family arrived in waves throughout the day. Yeon, Min-jae's younger sister, was 31 and sharp-faced and had the look of someone who had survived something and rebuilt herself around the surviving. She came with her 2 children, a boy of 7 named Junho and a girl of 5 named Sori, and without a husband, which Nia noted and didn't ask about. Yeon arrived and immediately pulled her brother into a brief, tight embrace that he returned with slightly more feeling than Nia had seen him express in 3 years of professional proximity, and then turned to Nia with eyes that were conducting their own rapid assessment. "He actually brought you," Yeon said. "He did," Nia said. "He told us about you in March. We've been waiting 5 months. She tilted her head. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly? Someone who looked more like she was afraid of him." She paused. "You don't look afraid of him." "Should I be?" Yeon smiled. It rearranged her whole face. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." She glanced at her brother. "I like her." "I know," Min-jae said. "You seem unsurprised." "I expected it." "That's almost a compliment," Nia said. "From him," Yeon said. "That's basically a declaration." Min-jae gave his sister a look that Nia translated as stop, and Yeon gave him a look back that translated as no, and Nia felt something warm and unexpected move through her chest at the sight of it. The particular ease of 2 people who had known each other long enough that communication had compressed into pure expression. The extended family filled the rest of the afternoon. Uncles and cousins, and a great-uncle who was 93 and slept through most of the introductions. Min-jae stayed close to her, not physically attached, but within range, present in the specific way that read as attentiveness to anyone watching. He brought her tea without being asked. He answered a cousin's question about their relationship with a sentence that contained her name and the phrase "the most honest person I've met," and she had to take a slow breath and look at the view. By 6 o'clock, she was exhausted in the bone-deep way that came from sustained performance. Not the fun kind of exhaustion, but the kind that came from spending an entire day at careful alert. She slipped out through the back of the main hall and found a terrace that faced the sea and stood there with both hands on the stone railing, letting the wind come at her face, letting herself breathe without measuring it. She heard the door behind her. She turned, expecting Min-jae. It was Sun-hee. The old woman came to the railing and stood beside her and looked at the ocean for a long moment without speaking. Nia straightened instinctively. "Sit," Sun-hee said, and gestured to the stone bench along the terrace wall. They sat. The sea moved below the cliffs, the sound of it constant and indifferent. "You watch him," Sun-hee said. Nia kept her expression neutral. "He's easy to watch." "No." The old woman's tone was not unkind, but it was not imprecise. "Not the way you watch him. Most people watch Min-jae with either fear or ambition, sometimes both." She paused. "You watch him the way my husband used to watch me, like you're keeping track of something." Nia said nothing. "He doesn't sleep enough," Sun-hee continued, as if this were connected. "He hasn't since he was 26. He came back from Incheon changed, and he's never told me exactly what happened. But I know what a person looks like when they've decided they're the only one who can be trusted to hold things together." She glanced at Nia. "And I know what they look like when someone comes along who makes them doubt that decision." "I'm his executive secretary," Nia said. "Yes," Sun-hee said pleasantly. "You are." The silence was layered. "I'm going to ask you something," Sun-hee said, "and I want you to tell me the truth. Not the story. The truth." Nia's pulse moved. "Does he make you happy?" The question was so direct and so simply put that Nia had no prepared response for it. She opened her mouth and found nothing had queued up. No deflection, no performance, no careful navigation. Just the question, and underneath it, the actual answer. "He makes me feel seen," she said, and it came out before she could stop it, carrying a weight she hadn't intended to release. That's not the same as happy, but it's something I didn't expect." Sun-hee looked at her for a long moment. "Close enough," she said. She stood, smoothed her hanbok, and looked out at the sea once more. "He has a tendency," she said, "to protect things by keeping them at a distance. He learned it young, and he's practiced it for 30 years. She turned toward the door. "If you care about him, you'll have to be stubborn about it. He'll make it very difficult." "I know," Nia said. "Good." Sun-hee moved toward the door, then paused. "Your Korean is better than you've let on." Nia looked at her. The old woman's expression was exactly that of someone who has caught something and is choosing not to make a scene of it yet. "Good night," Sun-hee said, and went inside. Nia sat on the bench for a long time after that, the sea moving below her, and thought about the specific trap she had walked into and the strange fact that she could not entirely bring herself to regret it. The trouble began on day 3. It came in the form of a man named Park Hyun-woo, who arrived with the second wave of family guests as the cousin of Min-jae's late mother. He was 52, well-dressed, with the kind of surface charm that Nia had learned to read as warning in her years of working for people who trafficked in surfaces. He came into the main dining room at lunch, and his eyes moved over the assembled family with professional speed and landed on Min-jae with a quality of attention that was not affection. She noticed. She said nothing. Over lunch, Park Hyun-woo was cordial and smooth. He spoke about the shipping routes in Busan with the ease of someone who knew the subject. He asked Min-jae about the Apgujeong development with questions that were precisely the questions of someone who had been briefed on it by someone close to it. Min-jae answered him without expression, but his hand, resting on the table, had gone very still. After lunch, in the hallway near the east wing, she fell into step beside Min-jae and kept her voice low. "Who is he?" she said. "Family." "Don't." He glanced at her, that quick sideways assessment. "He's connected to a group that has been trying to access the Busan network for 2 years, he said quietly. He's attended 3 family events in the past 5 years. He wasn't invited to this one. Then how is he here? My uncle. He didn't know. His jaw was set. He knows now. Is there a problem? There may be. What kind? The kind that doesn't belong here, he said, and his voice had dropped to something cold and stripped down. The kind I was hoping to leave in Seoul for 1 week. She touched his arm, brief and light, the kind of contact that looked, to anyone watching, like a couple sharing a private word. Then keep it there, she said quietly. Don't let him see you calculating. You've been here for 3 days, and your grandmother has started to believe that you're actually someone who can sit still long enough to eat a meal. Don't blow that. He looked at her. He's watching the exits, she said. He's been watching you. Don't give him a reaction to work with. A beat. You're better at this than I expected, he said. I've been managing your reactions for 3 years, she said. This is the same job with a different setting. He exhaled. Some of the set went out of his jaw. Stay close to me tonight, he said. I'm already close to you. Closer, he said, and there was something in it that was not entirely tactical. Tucked. That evening, the family gathered in the main hall for an informal dinner, the long table full and loud in the way of large families who had not been in the same room for months. The children ran between the adults' chairs. Yeon argued good-naturedly with their uncle about something Nia followed only partially. Wine was poured. The light was warm and the sea was audible through the open windows. Park Hyun-woo sat 3 seats down from Nia and across the table, which meant she was in his eye line, and she ate her dinner and maintained 2 separate conversations while tracking him in her peripheral vision the way she tracked deadline schedules, automatically, constantly, without apparent effort. Halfway through the meal, Junho climbed into Min-jae's lap. It happened the way children impose themselves on adults, suddenly and without warning, and Min-jae went very still in the particular way of someone who has been caught off guard by something they don't know how to refuse. Junho was 7, and apparently indifferent to the concept of the feared shadow tiger, and he settled himself in his uncle's lap and reached across the table for a piece of bread and went about eating it with total authority. Nia watched Min-jae's face. She watched him look down at this small person who had simply decided to occupy his space, and she watched something in his expression do something it almost never did. Soften, without defense, without strategy, just honestly. He put his hand on the child's back, steadying him. She had to look away. Across the table, Park Hyun-woo was watching too. Later that night, the family moved to the sitting room, and the adults settled into the particular loose configuration of people who have eaten well and are not ready to separate yet. Min-jae was caught in conversation with his uncle near the fireplace, and Nia was standing near the window with Yeon, who had put both children to bed and was now holding a glass of wine and looking at her brother with an expression Nia couldn't fully read. "He's different," Yeon said. "Different how? Less like he's managing everything." She took a sip. "Normally when he comes here for family events, he's present physically and somewhere else mentally. Like he's got 3 parallel operations running in his head the whole time." She paused. "He keeps looking at you." "We're together," Nia said carefully. "No." Yeon shook her head. "Not like that. Not the way people look at someone they're supposed to be looking at. The way someone looks when they keep being surprised by the same thing." Nia said nothing. "He's been alone for a long time," Yeon said quietly. "And I don't mean that in the simple sense. I mean, he built the alone very deliberately after everything that happened, and he got good at it, and I stopped believing it would ever change." She looked at Nia. "I'm not saying this to pressure you. I just want you to know that whatever you see in him, if you see something worth staying for, I promise it's real. He doesn't know how to perform the kind of thing I'm watching him do right now." The words sat in Nia's chest like weight. "Yeon," she said. "I know. Too much." Yeon gave a short, self-aware laugh. "I tend to do that. Dump the whole thing on someone because I've been holding it for too long." She looked at her brother again. "He would be furious if he knew I said any of this." "Then let's make sure he doesn't find out," Nia said. Yeon smiled at her. "I really do like you." Across the room, Min-jae extracted himself from his uncle's conversation and moved toward them, and his eyes found Nia's first across the distance. And that thing happened again. The thing she'd been refusing to name. The thing that had been happening for 2 weeks now, with increasing frequency and decreasing capacity to be ignored. Park Hyun-woo excused himself from the room at that moment. She saw him go. She noted the direction. She noted the phone already in his hand. She excused herself from Yeon. She intercepted Min-jae before he reached the window. "He just left the room," she said under her breath. "Phone in hand, east corridor." Min-jae didn't look toward the corridor. "I saw. What do you want to do?" "Nothing tonight." His voice was even. "Not here. Not in front of the family." "Okay, but I need you to know—" He stopped. His voice dropped further, low enough that it was just for her. "If this escalates before the gala, I may need to move quickly. That may mean I'm unavailable for a period. I understand. It would require you to hold the family front alone. I can do that." He looked at her. Close range, low light, the sound of his family in the room behind her. "I know you can," he said. "That's not what I'm concerned about." "Then what?" He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "I don't want you in the middle of it," he said quietly. "Whatever Hyun-woo is here to do, I don't want you touching any part of it." "Min-jae." "I know. You can handle yourself, I know. He exhaled through his nose. It's not about what you can handle. She looked at him. Then what is it about? She said. He held her gaze and something moved across his face that he wasn't trying to hide, and the room behind her was warm and full of the sound of his family. And outside the windows, the sea moved in the dark. And this was the moment. She felt it. She knew it. The way you know the moment a thing becomes irreversible, where the clean line she had drawn in her own mind began to dissolve. I'll be fine, she said softly. Yes, he said. You will. That's not the point. And then Yeon called his name from across the room, and the moment broke, and he moved away. And Nia stood at the window with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass, and her heart doing something architectural she couldn't afford. Not here, not now, not in this house where everything— the cold glass under her palm was the only thing that felt real. Nia stood at the window long after Min-jae moved away, long after the conversation behind her resumed its warm, familial texture, and she pressed her hand flat against the surface and let the cold travel up through her wrist and into her arm, and she thought, this is the problem. Not Park Hyun-woo, not the gala in 4 days, not the performance she was supposed to be sustaining. The problem was that she had stopped performing somewhere between the restaurant in Mapo and the floor of her apartment and this room, and she hadn't noticed it happening, which was the most dangerous kind of change, the kind that was already complete before you registered it had begun. She went to bed at 11. She lay awake until 2. At 2:17, her phone lit up on the nightstand, a message from Min-jae. Hyun-woo made 3 calls between 11 and midnight, 1 to Busan, 2 to a number we don't have on record. I'm dealing with it. Don't come to the East Wing tonight regardless of what you hear. She read it twice. Regardless of what you hear. She typed back, Are you safe? The reply came in 40 seconds. Yes, sleep. She put the phone down. She looked at the ceiling of the room they'd given her, a guest room in the South Wing, traditional in its details, with paper screens on the windows that let the moonlight through and diffuse panels. She listened to the house around her. It was quiet. The particular quiet of a large old building at night, full of sleeping people, the sea audible underneath everything. She did not sleep. Morning came gray and salted with wind off the water. She was dressed and downstairs before 7, which put her in the kitchen with the household staff and a pot of coffee, and enough time to organize her thoughts before the family descended. She was on her second cup when Yeon appeared in the doorway in a robe, hair loose, with the slightly wrecked look of someone who also hadn't slept well. Yeon looked at her. You know something, Yeon said. Good morning. Don't. Yeon came in and poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter. I've been living with Min-jae's version of everything is fine for 15 years. You've got the same expression he gets? She wrapped both hands around her mug. Where is he? I don't know, Nia said, which was true. Did something happen last night? I'm not sure. Also true. Yeon studied her. Park Hyun-woo is gone. Nia looked up. His room is empty, Yeon said. Bags cleared out. He left before dawn. She kept her voice even, but her knuckles on the mug were white. My uncle is upstairs trying to reach him and getting nothing. She paused. This has the texture of something my brother arranged. I can't speak to that. Nia. I genuinely don't know the details, she said. I know that Min-jae was aware of a problem. I know he said he was handling it. That's the full extent of what I know. Yeon was quiet for a long moment. There were years, she said finally, low and tired, when I didn't ask questions because asking questions meant acknowledging what the answers might be. What kind of operations? What kind of people? She looked at her coffee. I made my peace with it because he kept it away from me and the kids and grandmother, because whatever he does in Seoul, he's always kept this place clean. I know, Nia said. I need it to stay clean. Yeon's voice cracked slightly at the seam. 3 days ago I told you he was different, that you'd changed something in him. I meant it. She looked up. Don't let it follow him here. I'm not the one with the power to make that call, Nia said quietly. No. Yeon set down her mug. He is. She straightened. Tell him I said so. When you see him. She left. Nia sat alone in the kitchen with the sound of the sea coming through the windows and the coffee going cold in her cup. Min-jae came back at 9:15. She heard the car on the gravel, and she was in the main hall when he came through the door, and she saw it immediately. The set of his shoulders, the particular arrangement of his face that she had learned to read as the aftermath of something he'd had to do that he would not discuss. His jacket was different from last night. He'd changed somewhere. His eyes went to her first, the way they'd been doing for days now, and she held his gaze and he crossed the hall to where she was standing. "It's handled," he said, low. "Jan knows he's gone." "I expected that." "She's not angry," Nia said. "She's scared." Something moved in his jaw. "I'll speak to her. She wants it to stay clean here, the estate, the family. I know." He exhaled. "I know what she wants." He looked away toward the window, toward the strip of sea visible between the trees. Hyunwoo was here to confirm something for the Busan group. Not to act. Not yet. He was reconnaissance. He paused. The information he was looking for concerned the gala's guest list. Specifically, which business associates would be attending. She went still. "They're planning something at the gala. It's possible. Likely, now that Hyunwoo has left, and they know the element of surprise is gone." He looked back at her. "I have people coming in tomorrow. Security. They'll be discreet. Your grandmother will notice." "Yes." "She's going to ask you directly." "Yes." "And what are you going to tell her?" He was quiet. "I'll tell her enough," he said. "Min-jae." She kept her voice low and even. "She's 80 years old, and she built this family on a foundation of knowing exactly what was happening inside it at all times. If you give her enough, she'll know it's incomplete, and she'll spend the rest of the week constructing the missing pieces on her own, which will stress her more than the truth." He looked at her. "Tell her," Nia said. "Not everything, but enough that she doesn't have to imagine worse." He studied her for a long moment. "When did you become an expert on my grandmother?" he said. "I sat with her on the terrace 2 nights ago for 45 minutes. She held his gaze. "She's not fragile. Don't treat her like she is." He was silent. "All right," he said finally. "And eat something. You have the look of someone who hasn't eaten since lunch yesterday." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully parse. Something that was almost disbelief, almost something warmer. "Yes," he said. "All right. But..." The day moved carefully. Min-jae spoke with his grandmother for 40 minutes in her private sitting room. Nia didn't know exactly what was said. What she knew was that Sun-hee emerged from that conversation with her spine straight, and her expression settled into something that looked less like worry and more like resolved determination, which Nia recognized as a woman who had been given a problem she had decided she could work with. The additional security arrived the following morning, but 6 people distributed through the estate staff in ways that would read as household help to anyone who wasn't looking for them. The gala was in 2 days. The evening before the gala was the first quiet one they'd had at the estate. The extended family, feeling the slight but perceptible shift in atmosphere, had organized their own small gathering in the east sitting room, and Min-jae and Nia had eaten dinner late in the kitchen with Yeon and the children, and then Yeon had taken the children up to bed, and they were alone in the kitchen, and the house was settling into its nighttime sounds around them. Min-jae was at the counter with a cup of coffee. Nia was at the table with the remains of the meal between them, and her shoes off, and her feet tucked under her, which was not a position she'd have allowed herself a week ago in his presence, but which the week had apparently made possible. "Tell me something," she said. He looked at her. "When this is over," she said, "when the gala happens, and we go home, and we go back to what we said we'd go back to." She kept her eyes on the table. "Do you actually believe that's possible? The clean line. Both of us just stepping back over it." He didn't answer immediately. She looked up. His face was doing the thing it had been doing more frequently in the past 48 hours. That stripped quality, the one where the practiced surface was present but thin, and underneath it something with more texture and considerably more consequence. "No," he said. The word was quiet. Just that. "No," she repeated. "No." She held his gaze. Her heart was doing something she could feel in her throat. "That's a problem," she said. "I know." "We said, I know what we said." He set down the coffee cup. "I said I didn't know. That night in your apartment. You asked if I could still draw the line, and I said I didn't know. This is the answer to that question." He looked at her steadily. "I can't." The kitchen was very quiet. "Min-jae," she said. "You asked for honesty," he said. "I'm giving you honesty." What are you? She stopped. Her voice had something in it she was trying to contain. What are you telling me? That you... I'm telling you I don't want to go back. He said it plainly, with the same flat precision he'd used to tell her about the dog when he was 9, the same stripped-down delivery that meant he had decided not to protect himself from it. I'm telling you that whatever I told myself this arrangement was, whatever either of us told ourselves, I have not been pretending for some time, if I was ever pretending. She stared at him. There is a version of this conversation, he continued, where I say nothing, and we go home and we both construct the fiction that we agreed to, and I spend the next 2 years being extremely professional and extremely miserable. His jaw moved. I'm not interested in that version. The fluorescent light of the kitchen was not romantic. The remains of dinner were on the table between them. Outside the window, the night was full of wind and the sound of the sea. None of it was the setting for anything important. All of it was exactly the setting for this. I have conditions, she said. Her voice was not entirely level. Something shifted in his face. Tell me. I'm not a solution to your loneliness. She held his gaze. I'm not a replacement for the parts of yourself you closed off after Incheon. If this is real, it has to be because you want me. Specifically, actually. And not because I'm the person who was standing close enough when you decided to open a door. You're the only person I've let stand that close in 12 years, he said. That's not the same. I know. He moved from the counter, came around the table, stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain the eye contact she was refusing to break. I know it's not the same. I know the difference between proximity and choice. He looked at her with a directness that had nowhere to hide in it. You are the choice. Not the circumstance, you. The word landed. She felt it land. I've loved you for 3 years, she said, and it came out raw and unfinished and more honest than anything she'd managed to say in all the careful weeks before this moment. He looked at her like she'd said something that cost him nothing and everything at the same time. He put his hand along her face, and then the door opened. Yeon stood in the doorway and registered what she'd walked into and went completely still, a beat of pure silence. I forgot my wine glass, Yeon said. Yeon, Min-jae said. I'm leaving. I'm already leaving. Pretend I was never here. She retrieved the wine glass from the counter at speed, looking at the ceiling with aggressive deliberateness. This is not happening. I see nothing. Good night. She was gone. The door swung shut. Nia looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at the door. The sound of Yeon's footsteps ascending the stairs. Then, distinctly, from somewhere above, a muffled sound that was absolutely, unmistakably a restrained celebration. Nia put her face in her hands. She felt him looking at her. Then she felt, against all expectation, the slight movement of his shoulders. And she looked up, and Kang Min-jae was laughing. Not the controlled, minimal expression she'd catalogued over 3 years. Actually laughing, quiet and real, with his whole face in it, and the sight of it did something to her chest that she had no architecture left to contain. She's going to be unbearable, she said. For years, he agreed. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then his phone rang. The laugh left his face the way weather changes. Fast, complete, replaced by something that had no warmth in it. He looked at the screen. Whatever name or number was on it made his jaw set in a way she hadn't seen since the morning after Hyun-woo disappeared. He picked up. He said nothing for the first 10 seconds, just listened. His hand was very still at his side. His eyes moved to hers and she read something in them she had not seen before. Not fear. Min-jae didn't carry fear in any conventional sense, but something adjacent, something that looked like a calculation being rapidly revised. How long ago? He said. Pause. Where? Another pause. Don't move. I'm coming. He hung up. He looked at her. His face was back to the operational version. Controlled, stripped, moving fast behind the surface. What happened? She said. The Busan group didn't wait for the gala, he said. Her stomach dropped. They hit the Incheon warehouse 40 minutes ago, he said. 3 of my people are down. The kitchen was very cold suddenly. How bad? She said. I don't know yet. He was already moving toward the door. I have to make calls. I need the study. I need an hour. Go, Nia. He stopped with his hand on the door. His back was to her. Whatever I told you tonight, whatever happened tonight, that's real. It stays real regardless of what happens in the next 24 hours. She looked at the back of his shoulders. I know, she said. He left. She sat alone in the kitchen and the wind pressed against the windows, and the sea was very loud now. Or maybe it had always been this loud and she'd been too occupied to hear it properly until now, and she sat with her hands flat on the table and tried to think. 3 people down. The gala was tomorrow night. Hyunwoo had been reconnaissance. Min-jae had said so. He'd confirmed the guest list, the layout, the timing, which meant whatever the Busan group intended had not been deterred by his early removal. It had only been accelerated. She got up, she rinsed the dishes. She put the remains of the meal away and she wiped down the table with the methodical focus of someone who needed to occupy their hands while their mind worked through something too large to look at directly. And then she heard it, not from the study, from upstairs. A sound she recognized before she consciously processed it. The high, thin sound of a child woken by something, disoriented and frightened. Sorry. The 5-year-old. Nia was moving before she'd made the decision to move. She went up the back stairs to the children's room and pushed open the door and found Sori sitting up in her small bed with tears on her face and her brother Junho still asleep in the other bed. And Sori looked at her with the particular expression of a child who is frightened and trying very hard not to make it a production. I heard loud sounds, Sori said. It's the wind off the water, Nia said. The sea gets loud at night here. It's nothing. It sounded like people being angry. Nia sat on the edge of the bed. Sometimes the wind sounds like that. It's a geography thing, the way the cliffs funnel the sound up toward the house. Sori looked at her with devastating 5-year-old skepticism. That's a very complicated explanation for someone who just woke up, Nia said. Sori considered this. Are you and Uncle Min-jae going to get married? The question arrived without warning, the way children deployed them. That's a very complicated question for someone who just woke up, Nia said. Grandma's son says you're the right one. Sori lay back down with the immediate, uncomplicated trust of a child who has decided to return to sleep. She said so to Mother. I heard. Nia pulled the blanket up. Go to sleep, she said. She says he looks at you like grandfather looked at her. Sori? I'm sleeping. She was, in fact, already most of the way there, her small face smoothing out into the blank piece of childhood sleep. And Nia sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer than necessary and listened to the sound of the wind and the sea and the house around her, full of sleeping people who had nothing to do with shipping networks or warehouses or the 3 people currently down in Incheon. She went back downstairs. She walked to the study door. She could hear his voice through it, low, rapid, stripped of everything except operational precision. She didn't open the door. She sat on the bench in the hallway outside it, and she leaned her back against the wall, and she stayed. She was still there an hour later when the door opened and he came out and found her. He stopped. He looked at her sitting on the hallway bench in the dark. You're still here, he said. I said I'd stay close, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face did something she had no name for. Something that was past control, past the careful management of 30 years. Something that simply was. The 3 people, he said quietly. They're alive. Injured. Stable. She exhaled. The warehouse is destroyed, he said. The Busan group knew exactly which section, exactly which inventory. He paused. They had inside information, current information, not Hyun-woo. The timeline is wrong for him. Someone closer. The hallway was very still. Someone in the operation, she said. Yes. Someone who has current access. Yes. How current? He looked at her. Within the last 72 hours current, he said. Someone who knew what Hyun-woo was looking for and had the access to fill in what he couldn't get himself. The air between them shifted. Min-jae, she said. I'm not saying it's you, he said immediately, and his voice was flat and fast. I'm not. But I need you to understand what I'm walking into tomorrow. Someone I trust, someone inside, gave that information to people who used it to destroy something and put 3 of my people in hospital. He looked at her steadily. And I can't, right now, tonight, I cannot identify who it was. She stood up. She looked at him straight on. Then we find out who, she said. Nia, don't. Her voice was even. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about closing the door back up. You're thinking about the way you learn to carry things alone because trusting someone costs more than it's worth, and this is exactly the kind of moment that proves it. She stepped toward him. Don't. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the calculations she'd seen in boardrooms. Rapid, cold, self-protective. I have been sitting on that bench for an hour, she said, because I decided weeks ago, in ways I didn't fully acknowledge to myself, that whatever you're carrying, I'm not leaving you to carry it alone. That is not a performance. That is not the arrangement talking. She stopped directly in front of him. That is me, telling you, that you don't have to do this by yourself. The house was silent around them. He looked at her for a long time. And then something happened in his face that she had never seen before, not once in 3 years. Not the managed blankness, not the operational precision, not even the careful, unguarded moments she'd collected like rare things over the course of the week. This was different. This was the face underneath all of it, the one that existed before 12 years of building walls around every soft thing he'd ever made the mistake of letting out. He looked exhausted. He looked human. He looked like someone who had been alone for a very long time and had just, at great cost, decided to stop. There's something you need to know, he said. His voice was different, lower. Something stripped out of it that was usually there. The arrangement, he said. The fake relationship, the contract. He stopped, looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. I told you I needed a girlfriend for my grandmother. That was true, but it wasn't... He stopped again. The muscle in his jaw moved. I had been looking for a reason for months, before my grandmother's ultimatum, before any of it. He held her gaze. You have been the most important person in my daily life for 3 years, and I was terrified of that, and I didn't know how to... He stopped. The contract was the only door I knew how to build. She stared at him. You manufactured it, she said slowly. The circumstances were real. The grandmother, the pressure, all of it. But would I have found another way, another door, if those circumstances hadn't existed? He held her gaze and didn't look away. Yes, I would have found another way because I wasn't willing to let you leave. The hallway was very quiet. She thought about this document he'd written, the details it had contained, the Vietnamese food on Tehran Row, the October evening when he'd asked her to stay late for a filing system that didn't need reorganizing. You had already fallen in love with me, she said. Yes, he said simply. She looked at him. Outside, the wind moved through the old trees around the estate, and the sea was loud on the cliffs, and somewhere in the house one of the security team moved through a corridor on their rotation, and in the children's room upstairs Sori slept with her small face smoothed out and peaceful, and the gala was tomorrow, and someone inside his operation had given information to people who wanted to destroy him, and everything was at its most dangerous and most fragile at exactly the same. She didn't move. He didn't move. The hallway held them both in the specific suspension of a moment that has not yet decided what it will become, and the wind pressed against the old house, and the sea was loud on the cliffs below, and everything was at its most dangerous and most fragile at exactly the same time. And then Nia said, Okay. Not I forgive you. Not, it's fine, just okay. The word that meant she had received the information and was still standing and had decided to keep standing, which was, for now, enough. He exhaled. It was small and controlled, and she heard it anyway. Okay, she said again, quieter. But we deal with tomorrow first, everything else after. He nodded. Tell me about the inside source, she said. Who has current access? Narrow it. He straightened. The personal thing folded back, not gone, but stored, and the operational version came forward because that was what the next 12 hours required. 4 people have access to the specific inventory records that were compromised. 2 are in Seoul. 2 traveled to Jeju for the gala. Who traveled? My logistics director, Park Sung-mo. Been with me 9 years, he paused. And my head of operations, Lee Dong-hyun. 11 years. She looked at him. You trust both of them. I trusted both of them. Past tense. As of 3 hours ago, yes. She pressed her back against the wall and thought. What was in the compromised inventory? Shipping containers. Legitimate cargo. The Incheon warehouse is clean, Nia. It's part of the legal network. I'm not asking about legality. I'm asking what was specific enough that someone would burn a warehouse to destroy it. He was quiet for a beat. Documentation. Physical records of a land acquisition deal that 3 separate parties have been trying to block for 2 years. The acquisition that would give the Kang network controlling interest in Busan's northern port corridor. And if the documents burn, the deal collapses. The rival group absorbs the corridor. 10 years of positioning gone. His voice was flat and precise, and underneath the flatness was something she recognized as the particular fury of a man who has been hit in the place he worked hardest to protect. And whoever gave them the location gets paid enough to disappear comfortably. But the documents burned. The originals burned. She looked at him. Copies, she said. My attorney in Seoul has digital copies in a secured archive, but without the physical originals and the witness signatures. He stopped. There's a window. 48 hours before the rival group can file to block the acquisition on the grounds of documentation failure. If I can get the copies certified and filed before that window closes. The gala is tomorrow night. Yes. Which is also when whatever the Busan group is planning here happens. Yes. She looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at him. So you have to be in 2 places at once. Yes. And you have a source inside who may be in this building right now. Yes. And your grandmother's 80th birthday celebration is in 18 hours. Yes. She pushed off the wall. Wake up Sungmo and Donghyun, both of them, separately. Tell them about the window, the 48-hour filing deadline. Tell each of them a slightly different version of which Seoul attorney holds the copies. She looked at him. Whichever version the Busan group acts on tells you who talked. He stared at her. That's basic, I know, but it works. She held his gaze. You have maybe 6 hours before the house wakes up, and you lose the ability to move quietly. Use them. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she didn't have time to examine. Go, she said. He went. She didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen with coffee and the sound of the house around her, and she ran the variables in her head the way she ran logistics, methodically, without sentimentality, accounting for the things she could control and cataloging the things she couldn't. At 4 a.m, she heard Min-jae's footsteps in the corridor outside, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway. His face told her something had moved. Donghyun, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. 11 years. He made a call at 3:47, Min-jae said. His voice was very controlled. To the number we don't have on record, the same number Hyun-woo called from the East Corridor. He came in and sat down across from her. His hands were flat on the table and very still. 11 years. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at the table. He has a daughter, 8 years old. His wife left 2 years ago. He stopped. I paid for the medical bills when the daughter was sick. I thought... He stopped again. I thought that meant something. She didn't offer him a reassurance she didn't have. She just sat with him in the kitchen at 4 a.m. while he processed the specific and particular devastation of finding out that someone you built something with had decided you were worth less than the price they were offered. After a moment, he said, He's in the East Wing. Your security team, already positioned. He looked up. I need to speak to him before the house wakes up, before the gala, before any of this becomes visible to the family. Do you need me there? No. Flat, absolute. I need you as far from that conversation as possible. She understood. Grandmother will be up by 6, she said. Yawn by 6:30. The children don't sleep past 7. I know. You have 90 minutes. He stood. He looked at her across the kitchen table in the 4 a.m. dark of the estate with everything that had happened in the last 12 hours sitting in the air between them, and he said quietly and without decoration, When this is done. When this is done, she agreed. He left. She heard nothing from the East Wing. Whatever happened in that room happened in the silence that the old house absorbed the way it absorbed everything. The wind, the sea, the 30 years of family history laid into its walls. She stayed in the kitchen. She made more coffee. At 5:45, she heard footsteps. Min-jae's, she'd learned to know them. On the back stairs, and then the house was quiet again. At 6:10, Sun-hee appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Naya. She looked at the table. She looked at the 2 coffee cups. Tell me, she said. So Nia told her. Not everything. Not the operational details. Not Donghyun's name. Not the warehouse in Incheon. But the shape of it. That someone trusted had made a choice that cost the family, that Minjae had handled it in the night, that the gala tonight carried a risk they were prepared for. Sunhee listened without interrupting. When Nia finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment. Then, "My husband dealt with things like this 4 times in 30 years. I learned not to ask for the details because the details were not what mattered." She sat down at the table. "What matters is whether the man handling it is still standing when it's done." "He's still standing," Nia said. "Because of you, partly. Because of himself, mostly." Sunhee looked at her with those eyes that had been doing their comprehensive work since the moment Nia arrived. "You're not what I expected either," she said. "So I've been told. I expected someone more." She paused, choosing. "Decorative, the kind of woman men like my grandson choose when they're not actually choosing. When they're just filling a space." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup Nia pushed toward her. "You're filling nothing. You're occupying space that was already yours. You just didn't know it yet." Nia said nothing. "He knew it," Sunhee said, "before you did." The kitchen was brightening with early morning light. Outside, the old trees were moving in the sea wind, and the sky over the water was going from gray to pale gold. "The gala tonight," Nia said. "How much do you want to know?" "Enough to be useful," Sunhee said. "Not so much that I spend the day afraid." So Nia told her that much. The gala began at 7. The Kang Estate's main ballroom opened onto the clifftop terrace, and by 6:30 it was full of the particular controlled energy of an important event in final preparation. Staff moving with purpose, the long tables arranged with precision, the lighting calibrated to the warm end of the spectrum that made everyone look like the best version of themselves. 300 guests. Politicians, business leaders, the extended architecture of the Kang family's 2 generations of influence, and somewhere in the room, people who had come for something other than Sunhee's birthday. Minjae was already in the ballroom when Nia came down. He was standing near the far end of the room, speaking with his uncle, dressed in black, and he turned when she entered, and the room did a particular thing that rooms did sometimes. The sound and motion of it continuing unchanged, while something private happened in the space between 2 people that everyone else was exterior to. She was wearing deep green, long, fitted, her hair down. She'd dressed for the ballroom, but she'd also dressed for herself, in the way she'd been slowly learning to do over the past 3 years. Not smaller, not apologetic, not arranged for someone else's comfort. He crossed the room to her. "You look—" He stopped. Started again. "You look like yourself." "Is that a compliment?" "Yes." He said it without hesitation. "The highest one I know how to give." She held his gaze. "How are you?" "Functional." "Minjae." "Holding," he said quietly. "Ask me again tomorrow." She nodded. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked into the gala together, and the evening began. The first 2 hours were the performance at its most sustained. Nia moved through 300 people on Minjae's arm, and she smiled, and she remembered names, and she navigated 4 separate attempts by curious relatives to probe the relationship timeline, and she ate almost nothing and drank 1 glass of champagne over the course of 90 minutes. Minjae stayed close, his hand at her back, her waist, her elbow. The geography of a couple in motion, natural enough now that she stopped tracking when it happened and just let it be what it was. His security team was distributed through the room with the invisibility of professionals. She'd learned their faces in the morning briefing Minjae had run at 9, standing in the study with his core team while the family had breakfast. She could locate 3 of them from where she stood at any given moment without appearing to look. At 9:15, one of them moved. She felt it before she fully saw it. A shift in the room's weight, the way energy redistributes when something changes beneath the surface. She was in conversation with a business associate of Minjae's uncle when she saw the security team member near the East Terrace doors change his posture by 2 degrees. She pressed Minjae's arm. He felt it. He'd been feeling it too. "Terrace," he murmured. "2 of them," she said under her breath, having counted the angles. "Maybe 3. Stay here. No. Nia, if you disappear from this room in the middle of your grandmother's gala, everyone in it will know something is wrong, and your grandmother will spend the next 40 minutes managing 300 guests' panic." She held his arm. "Stay. Let your people work." His jaw was set. His eyes were moving through the room. 2 minutes, she said quietly. "Give them 2 minutes." He stayed. She felt the effort of it in the tension of his arm under her hand, the specific cost of a man who had spent 30 years acting and who was currently choosing not to. 90 seconds later, his earpiece, small, nearly invisible, fed him something she couldn't hear, and she watched his face process it. 3 of them, he said under his breath. On the terrace. They came through the service gate. A pause, listening. No weapons found. They're carrying documentation. Documentation. Filing papers. Legal. His voice was flat and cold. They were going to serve papers at the gala, in front of witnesses, claiming the acquisition documents are fraudulent, using the warehouse fire as evidence of document tampering on our side. He exhaled once, controlled. It was never about physical violence. It was about humiliation, a public legal challenge in front of every significant witness in the region. She understood it immediately. Destroy the deal and the reputation in one move. Yes. Can they do it? If the papers reach a witness before my attorney files the certified copies in Seoul, yes. The 48-hour window, what time does Seoul open? The filing office opens at 9 a.m. She looked at him. It's 9:18. He was already reaching for his phone. What happened next happened fast and without sufficient oxygen. Minji's call to Seoul connected on the second ring. His attorney, clearly waiting, clearly already moving. Nia kept her body between him and the room, her back to him, maintaining the surface of a woman in conversation with her companion, keeping the 300 people behind her undisturbed while he spoke in rapid, compressed Korean into the phone. On the terrace, his security team had the 3 men contained. Not violently, contained, the way professionals contained people when the objective was control rather than confrontation. She could see them through the glass doors if she angled slightly, 3 suited men in the cliff-top wind with Min Jae's people positioned around them in a geometry that allowed no useful exit. 60 seconds, 90, 2 minutes. He ended the call. She turned. His face told her something before he spoke. Filed, he said. 9:22. The certified copies are on record. He looked at the terrace. Whatever those papers say, the acquisition is protected. She exhaled. The feeling that moved through her was not quite relief because relief was too clean for what this night had been, and she was too tired for clean emotions. But it was adjacent. Something that felt like ground under her feet after a long time without it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. And then Sunhee appeared at the front of the ballroom, and the room turned toward her, and the evening reassembled itself around the actual event it was supposed to be. And someone on the staff began the progression toward the long tables, and the gala moved forward the way galas moved, with momentum and music and the particular warm noise of 300 people who had, for the past 2 hours, been kept entirely unaware of everything that mattered. Tuts. Dinner was an hour and 40 minutes that Nia navigated on 4 hours of sleep and the specific adrenaline of a night that had not finished being what it was going to be. She ate this time. Methodically, without tasting most of it, because she was running on empty and her body was making demands she'd been deferring since midnight. Min Jae ate too. She'd watched him do it and had felt something specific and domestic about the fact that she'd noted it, that she was tracking his meals the way she'd always tracked them, except now without any professional justification for caring. At the table, she was between Min Jae and Yeon talked enough for 3 people, which Nia was grateful for, because it meant the silences she and Min Jae moved through were not required to justify themselves. Under the table, at some point between the second and third course, his hand found hers, not a performance. The room was arranged so that no one at the table had a sightline to their hands. No one was watching. There was nothing tactical about it. He just held her hand. She held it back. The speeches began at 10:30. Sunhee's nephew spoke first, and then an old friend of the family, and then Yeon, who was brief and warm and made the room laugh twice and made her grandmother's eyes go bright, and then Min Jae stood. He was not a man who gave speeches. She had watched him address boardrooms with the efficiency of someone conveying necessary information, and she had watched him in negotiations where words were instruments of precision, but she had never watched him stand in front of people he loved with nothing to gain from performance and nothing to protect himself with except honesty. He spoke about his grandmother. He spoke about the estate, the cliffs, the years he'd spent in this house learning the difference between power and strength from a woman who had both in measures he was still trying to understand. He spoke about what it meant to carry something for a long time, and to find, against your expectation that you didn't have to carry it alone. He turned toward Nia. The room shifted. She went very still. There's a person in this room, he said, and his voice was level and clear in the specific way of a man who has decided not to hedge this, who has spent 3 years making my world function, not because it was her job, though it was, but because she is, at her fundamental core, the kind of person who stays, who sees what needs doing and does it, who tells the truth even when the truth costs her something. He looked at her directly, in front of everyone, in a room full of his family and his grandmother and 300 witnesses, and he did not look away. I built something long and careful around the idea that trust was not worth its cost. She has spent 3 years quietly demonstrating that I was wrong. A beat. I am, extremely rarely, wrong. When I am, I try to say so clearly. The room was very quiet. I love her, he said. Simple. No performance in it. That's the full sentence. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room began to come apart at the seams in the best possible way. Applause starting somewhere to the left and spreading, Jan making a sound beside her that was absolutely not a sob, and absolutely was. Sun Hee at the head of the table with an expression that was the specific satisfaction of a woman who has been correct about something for longer than anyone realized. Nia looked at him. He looked at her. She stood up. She was not a speechmaker. She had no prepared remarks. She had 3 hours of sleep and 4 years of held-back feeling and the specific recklessness of a night that had already asked everything of both of them and was asking one more thing. And she thought, fine. I've been in love with you, she said, loudly enough for the room to hear, since approximately the 2nd month I worked for you, which was deeply inconvenient and which I handled by being extremely professional about it for an extremely long time. A sound from the room, laughter, warmth, the particular delight of an audience that is witnessing something real. You are difficult and controlled, and you skip meals, and you don't tell people what you're thinking until it's almost too late, and I've apparently decided that none of that is a deal breaker. She looked at him. So, the corner of his mouth moved. So, he said. He crossed the distance between them. He kissed her in front of everyone. Not a performance, nothing calculated in it, just the accumulated weight of 3 years and 1 week, and a very long night finally allowed to be exactly what it was. The room erupted. Sun Hee set down her wine glass and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman whose work here was done. Yeon was openly crying and making absolutely no attempt to stop. And for a moment, just this moment, in this room on the clifftop above the East China Sea, everything that had been broken and dangerous and unresolved fell away. And there was only this, only them, only the simple and enormous fact of 2 people who had finally stopped pretending that the thing between them was anything other than... The applause was still moving through the room when Min-jae pulled back. He looked at her. She looked at him. His hand was at her jaw and the room was erupting around them and neither of them was fully in it yet. They were still in that narrow space between the kiss and whatever came next. The space where you find out if the thing you just did was real or if the adrenaline had made it feel larger than it was. It was real. She could tell by the way he was looking at her, not the operational assessment, not the careful management, just him looking at her, with everything he'd spent 12 years putting away sitting plainly on his face. Okay, she said quietly, under the noise of the room. Okay, he said. And then his earpiece moved. She saw it in his eyes. The shift. The thing coming back in. The world reasserting itself the way it always did. His hand came down from her face. He didn't step back from her, but his attention divided. And she let it, because that was who he was, and she had chosen him knowing it. He listened for 4 seconds. Then, the 3 men on the terrace, they're asking for him. Him, she said. Dong-hyun, Chin. They brought Lee Dong-hyun through the service entrance of the estate at 10 minutes before 11, while 300 people ate dessert in the ballroom, and Sun Hee accepted birthday toasts with the grace of a woman who had survived harder nights than this one. Dong-hyun was 51 years old and had the look of a man who had been making a decision for a long time and had finally made it and was now living inside the consequences. He was not restrained. Min-jae's people stood at the perimeter of the study where they'd put him, but he sat without being held, his hands flat on his knees, his face carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who has stopped running. Min-jae stood in the doorway. Nia stayed in the hallway. This was not her room to be in. She knew that. She stood outside the half-open door and she listened because she needed to understand the full shape of what this night had cost. 11 years, Min-jae said. He closed the door most of the way behind him. His voice came through the gap, low, very controlled, with something underneath the control that was not anger exactly, but was adjacent to it, the older and more corrosive relative of anger. 11 years, Dong-hyun said. His voice was tired. Not remorseful. Tired, which was different, the sound of a man who had thought about this longer than Min-jae knew. Tell me why. A silence. My daughter, Dong-hyun said. After my wife left, after everything that happened, there were debts. Not the medical kind. The other kind. The kind that come with interest. He paused. The Busan group found them. They found me through the debts. Another pause. They didn't ask me to do anything at first. They just held them. For 8 months, they just held them over me, and I thought maybe it would never come to anything. That they'd lose interest. They never lose interest, Min-jae said. No. When did they activate you? February. Dong-hyun's voice didn't waver, but something in the texture of it changed. A slight roughening, the place where the tiredness and something else met. They wanted the route information first. I gave them the northern corridor schedules. A beat. I told myself it was minor, that no one would get hurt. 3 people are in a hospital in Incheon. The silence was long. I know, Dong-hyun said. I didn't know about the warehouse. They told me it was about the documents, just the documents. They said they'd file legally, no violence. His voice cracked at the seam, just slightly. I believed them because I needed to believe them. You believed them because believing them was cheaper than the alternative. Nothing from Dong-hyun. You had options, Min-jae said, and his voice was very quiet now, which was more frightening than volume, Nia had learned. The quieter he got, the more absolute the thing underneath was. You could have come to me in February. You could have come to me when they first found you. 8 months ago, you could have walked into my office and told me the truth, and I would have handled the debts, and I would have handled the threat, and you would still be... He stopped. You chose not to come to me. I was ashamed, Dong-hyun said. I know. I didn't think... You didn't think I'd help you. Min-jae said it plainly. After 11 years, you looked at what you knew about me, and you decided I was the kind of person who would let a man drown in something he could have been pulled out of. A pause. That's the part I'm still working through. Dong-hyun was quiet for a moment, then, I'm sorry. I know you are. What happens now? Min-jae was silent for long enough that Nia held her breath in the hallway. The 3 men on the terrace, he said finally. They work for you or for the Busan group. For the group, I've never met them. Then you're not connected to tonight's action. No, they moved independently. When Hyun-woo came back early, they accelerated the timeline without telling me. Dong-hyun's voice had gone flat and precise. The recitation of a man who has decided to give everything because there's nothing left to protect. I found out about the warehouse the same time you did. That's the only reason we're having this conversation instead of a different one, Min-jae said. Dong-hyun understood what that meant. Nia understood what that meant. The room held the weight of it without requiring it to be said more explicitly. Your daughter, Min-jae said. How old now? 8 years old. The debts? The total amount, Dong-hyun told him. Min-jae absorbed it. That will be cleared. Through a third party, untraceable to you. A pause. You're done with my operations. That's permanent and non-negotiable. Yes. Your severance will be structured as a standard executive departure. No reason given. You'll have professional references from the legal entity, not from me personally. Dong-hyun made a sound that was not quite a word. Your daughter doesn't grow up knowing her father sold out the people who trusted him, Min-jae said quietly. That's not generosity. That's... I knew your daughter when she was 3 years old, and she brought drawings to the office, and she called me the scary uncle, and I would like her to have a father who can look her in the eye. He paused. Don't make me regret this. I won't, Dong-hyun said. His voice was barely there. Go, Min-jae said. Someone will take you to the airport. Footsteps inside the study. The door opened fully, and Dong-hyun came through it, and he looked at Nia in the hallway. Registered her there. Registered that she'd heard, and something moved across his face that was past shame and into something rawer and less nameable. He didn't speak to her. She didn't speak to him. He moved down the corridor and around the corner and was gone. Minjae came out of the study. He leaned his back against the wall beside the doorway and looked at the ceiling and exhaled once, a long, controlled breath that took something out with it. His hands were in his trouser pockets, and his face was very tired. Nia stood beside him. They were quiet for a moment. "You could have destroyed him," she said. "Yes." "He earned it." "Yes." He looked at the ceiling. His daughter didn't. She looked at him. The hallway light was low, and the sound of the gala continued from the front of the house. Distant, warm, entirely separate from this corridor and what had happened in it. "You're a better man than you've spent 12 years pretending to be," she said. He looked at her. "Don't romanticize it," he said. "It was a calculation. Destroying him costs me more than releasing him. An enemy with nothing to lose is—" "Minjae." He stopped. "You just cleared a man's debts because his 8-year-old daughter draws pictures," she said. "You can call it a calculation if it makes you more comfortable, but I was standing in this hallway." He held her gaze. "Don't tell anyone," he said finally. "Your secret is safe." The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, and she felt the exhaustion in both of them. The bone-deep cellular exhaustion of a night that had asked everything and the strange lightness that came after. The particular lightness of people who have been through something and are still standing on the same side of it. They went back to the gala. They had to. 300 people, an 80-year-old matriarch, and a birthday celebration that had been prepared for months did not pause for the private events of the evening's perimeter, and so Minjae and Nia walked back into the ballroom at 11:15, and the party received them with the warmth of a room that had witnessed a declaration 45 minutes ago and had been metabolizing it happily ever since. Yon ambushed her within 30 seconds. "Are you all right?" Yon said, very quietly, because Yon had been watching the evening with the particular attention of a woman who had learned to read her brother's exits, and she knew that whatever had pulled them out had not been nothing. "Fine," Nia said. "Define fine." "Standing, functional, present." She looked at Yon. "It's handled." He handled it. Yon studied her face. Whatever she found there was apparently sufficient. She exhaled. "Okay." She squeezed Nia's arm. "Okay." Then, because Yon could not sustain gravity for longer than 90 seconds. "Also, that kiss was something my children will be told about when they're old enough." "Please don't." "Too late. It's family history now." The gala ended at midnight. The guests moved out in waves, the controlled dispersal of an event well run, and the family stayed on in the ballroom's quieter aftermath. The long tables carrying the comfortable wreckage of a good meal, the staff moving through the edges of the room in the unhurried way that came after the urgency had passed. Sunhee was still at her table. She was 80 years old and it was past midnight and she showed no inclination to go to bed, which Nia had already understood was entirely in character. She sat with a small glass of something amber, and she watched the room the way she watched everything, comprehensively, without appearing to. Nia sat beside her. The old woman looked at her and didn't speak for a moment. "It's done," Nia said quietly. "I know." Sunhee looked at her hands. "I heard the car on the service road at 11. I've been hearing cars on that road at odd hours for 50 years. I know the sound of something being resolved." She paused. "Was anyone badly hurt?" "Not tonight. Earlier. In Incheon, not here. 3 people. They're stable." Sunhee nodded. She absorbed this the way she absorbed things, without visible drama, just taking it in and placing it somewhere in the architecture of everything she had already survived. "My husband," she said, "spent the first 20 years of our marriage believing that the things he carried had to be carried alone, that bringing them into our home meant contaminating something." She looked at the amber in her glass. He was 63 before he stopped believing that. "I had 40 years with the closed version and 17 years with the open one, and I will tell you without qualification that the 17 were worth more than the 40, even with fewer of them." She looked at Nia. "Don't let him waste that kind of time." "I don't intend to," Nia said. "Good." Sunhee set down her glass. "Now help an old woman to bed. My feet have been finished since 10 o'clock. The week after the gala had a different texture. The guests departed in the first 2 days. The extended family dispersed back to their cities and their lives, carrying the birthday celebration with them like something they'd pack in luggage. The food, the speeches, The kiss that Jan had already described in 3 separate phone calls to people who hadn't been there. The estate contracted back to its essential self. Sunhee, Jan, and the children, Minjae and Nia, and the old house's bones settling in the sea wind. Minjae slept. This was not a small thing. Nia noticed it the first morning after the gala, when she came downstairs at 7 and he was not already at a desk somewhere running operations. She noticed it the second morning when she found Junho watching cartoons in the sitting room and Minjae asleep on the sofa beside him with the child tucked under his arm and the television going and neither of them aware of anything. She stood in the doorway for a long time looking at that. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and did not examine the thing happening in her chest too closely because it was too large to look at directly before caffeine. He found her at the kitchen table an hour later, slightly rumpled, with Junho's cartoon audio still audible from the other room. "You slept," she said. He sat down. Apparently. On the sofa, with a 7-year-old. He was already there. You could have moved him. He was already there, he repeated, and poured himself coffee with the matter-of-fact tone of a man who had fallen asleep on a sofa next to his nephew and intended to treat this as entirely unremarkable. She looked at her cup. "This is what it looks like," she said. He looked at her. "When you're not managing everything," she said. "When you put it down for a minute, this is what you look like." He held her gaze. "What do I look like?" he said. "Like someone who was always going to be this person," she said, "if anything had gone differently." He was quiet for a moment. "A lot went wrong," he said. "I know. I want you to understand that I'm not under any illusion about the things I've done and what they cost. What this life costs." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I'm not going to arrive at some clean version of myself on the other side of this week. I know that too. The operations don't disappear. The network doesn't—" "Minjae," she looked at him steadily. "I've worked for you for 3 years. I know exactly what your life is. I'm not here because I've decided to ignore it." She paused. "I'm here because I decided the full picture was still worth it." She held his gaze. "You don't have to apologize for your life to me. I just need you to share it. Actually share it. Not manage me around the edges of it." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's going to be harder than it sounds," he said. "I know. I've been doing the other thing for a long time. I know. You're going to have to be patient with the rate of progress." "I've been patient for 3 years," she said. "I have the muscle for it." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lived in the same neighborhood. "Yes," he said. "You do." They flew back to Seoul on a Thursday. Marcus called while she was packing, which she'd expected. He had a sense for the moments when things had shifted in her life, a kind of early warning system for his sister's state of being that had been calibrated over 20 years of knowing her. "Something happened," he said when she picked up. "A lot happened. Good something or bad something." She looked at the room around her. The guest room in the south wing of the Kang estate, the paper screens letting in the morning light, the sea audible through the walls. "Both," she said. "More good than bad, overall." "The boss." "Yes." "Nia." His voice had the warmth of someone who has been waiting for news he already suspected. "Finally." "Don't. I'm just saying, 3 years. I know how long it's been. 3 years of he's just my employer, and it's a professional relationship, and Marcus, I'm going to say I told you so. You never told me anything. I implied it constantly. That counts." A pause, and then the warmth shifted into something more careful. "Are you happy?" She sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm something," she said. "Something that's in the same direction as happy. Still close to the beginning of it." She paused. "He clears people's debts because their kids draw pictures, Marcus. He doesn't want anyone to know that about him, but I was standing in the hallway." Silence on the line. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "Okay, that tracks. He also runs a criminal empire and doesn't sleep and pushes people away when he's scared and will probably make my life significantly more complicated than it was before." "Nia." "What?" "You've been managing complicated since you were 19. You're very good at it." His voice was warm and serious in equal measure. "You deserve someone who deserves how good at it you are." She closed her eyes briefly. "The bills," she said. "The remaining treatment costs." "Covered," he said. "I know. I just need you to know that's not—" I know it's not why. He didn't let her finish. I know you, Nia. I know that's not why. A pause. Tell him I said thank you, and that if he makes you cry for the wrong reasons, I will find a way to be threatening about it despite being bedridden. She laughed. It came out rough and real and more relieved than she'd known she needed to be. I'll tell him, she said. Seoul in winter had a specific quality. The cold arriving earlier than the dark, the city contracting slightly around its warmth sources, the Han River going gray and heavy under a low sky. They landed on a Thursday afternoon, and by evening they were back inside the life that existed before Jeju, except that the life before Jeju no longer fit the same way, the way a coat doesn't fit right after you've grown into your own frame. The office was the office. The work was the work. Except that on Friday morning, when she brought the briefing materials to his desk, she found him already looking at the door when she came through it, and he looked at her the way he looked at her now, without pretending he wasn't. And she set the files down and said, "Tokyo call in 20 minutes." And he said, "I know." And she turned to go back to her desk, and he said, "Nia." She turned. "Dinner tonight," he said. "Not a cover story, not a rehearsal." "I know," she said. "Somewhere normal." "I'll pick the place," she said. "Somewhere you've never been." He looked at her. "Somewhere you might trip over the rug," she said. The corner of his mouth, the thing that lived near a smile. "Yes," he said. "All right." The weeks after Jeju moved differently. Not without difficulty. She hadn't expected without difficulty, and he hadn't offered it. And they'd both been honest enough about the shape of the road ahead that the hard parts, when they came, were hard in ways she'd already made room for. There was an evening in late November when he disappeared for 4 days, and she didn't hear from him except 2 brief messages, and she sat in her apartment and had the specific experience of choosing, in real time, not to make it smaller than it was, not to pretend she wasn't afraid, not to manufacture confidence she didn't have. And when he came back, he told her where he'd been and what it had required, and he told her things she understood. He'd never told anyone, because the telling itself was the thing he was still learning to do. And it cost him. She could see it cost him. The practiced self-sufficiency of 30 years grinding against this new and effortful openness. "It gets easier," she said. "Does it?" "I don't actually know," she said honestly, "but I think it does. I think most things that are worth doing get easier if you keep doing them." He looked at her. "That's either very wise or very optimistic," he said. "Probably both." He pulled her toward him, and she went, and they sat on her couch in the November dark with the city going on outside, and the specific warmth of 2 people who have been through enough together that the silence between them had become a place they could live in. Marcus was discharged from the hospital on a Tuesday in December. She was there. Min-jae was there. Which Marcus had not fully expected, and which landed on his face as something complicated and then something simpler. He shook Min-jae's hand with the look of a man conducting a rapid and comprehensive assessment, and then he looked at his sister with an expression that said, "Okay, I see it." And then he said, to Min-jae, "She spent 4 years eating lunch at her desk so she could leave an hour early to come see me. I need you to know that about her." Min-jae looked at her. "I know that about her," he said. "Good," Marcus said. "We're going to get along fine." The snow came to Jeju on a Saturday in late December. It was rare. The island was too mild, usually, for the proper winter the mainland got. But that year the cold came south early and hard, and by the time they landed, the estate's grounds were covered in the thin, particular snow of a place that didn't usually receive it, and the old trees stood in it like they were surprised. Min-jae had planned this. She'd known he planned it. He was not, at his fundamental nature, a spontaneous man. But she'd let him have the planning because she understood now that for him, intention was its own form of emotional expression, and the care he put into the arrangements of things was the vocabulary he'd been using all along, even before she'd known to read it. They walked to the cliff top at dusk. The snow was light on the ground and the air was cold and sharp, and the East China Sea below the cliffs was the color of iron, moving in long, slow swells under a sky that was going from pale gray to the deep blue-gray of winter nightfall. The estate lights were warm behind them. Inside, Yeon and the children were competing loudly over something involving board games, and Sun-hee was probably winning without appearing to try. He stopped at the edge of the cliff. She stopped beside him. They stood there for a moment in the particular silence of a high open place in winter, the wind moving through it, the sea below doing its indifferent work. She looked at him. He was looking at the water with an expression she had spent 3 years learning to read, and was still learning, but she was better at it now, better at finding what lived underneath the surface he presented to the world. And what she found there was not complicated. It was very simple. It was the face of a man who had arrived somewhere he had stopped believing he would ever arrive. He reached into his coat pocket. He turned to her. She looked at what was in his hand, and something moved through her chest that was not surprise. She'd known him too long and too well for surprise. She'd known this was in him somewhere since the October evening she'd stayed late to reorganize files that didn't need reorganizing. But it hit her anyway, the way true things hit you even when you've already felt them coming, with the full weight of themselves. It was not an elaborate ring. It was not an elaborate gesture. He stood on a cliff top in the snow with the sea behind him, and he held it out, and he looked at her with that stripped and undefended face that she had come to understand was the most honest thing she had ever been given. "I want to do the rest of this with you," he said. His voice was quiet and direct and contained no performance whatsoever. The actual rest. Not the arrangement, not the cover story. He paused. "You told me once that I didn't need to apologize for my life to you. I'm not apologizing for it. I'm asking you to walk into it with your eyes open, knowing everything that it is, and stay." The snow came down light and thin around them. The sea moved below. She looked at him, at this man who had spent 12 years building walls, and had spent the last several months learning, badly and bravely, and with considerable difficulty, to leave a door in them. And she thought about the night she'd stood on a sidewalk in the rain, with an envelope in her hand, and told herself it was a transaction. She thought about this hallway outside the study, and the kitchen floor and the terrace at dusk, and the sound of his voice saying, "I can't," in the quiet of a room where honesty had finally been cheaper than the alternative. She thought about all the forms that Stain had taken, and all the ways it still would. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. He held her hand for a moment and looked at it, and she looked at his face looking at it, and the sea was very loud on the rocks below them, and the snow was in his hair and hers, and somewhere behind them in the warm-lit estate, Sori was probably winning the board game through methods of unclear legitimacy. And Sun He was probably watching the clifftop through the window, with the expression of a woman who has been correct about something since approximately the third day. He looked up. She looked at him. The wind came off the water between them, and they stood in it, and she was not finished, not resolved into something easy or complete, because that was not the nature of the life she'd chosen or the man she'd chosen it with. But she was exactly where she was supposed to be, in the middle of something real, on a clifftop in the snow, with his hand warm around hers, and the sea going on below them, the way it always had and always would, indifferent to everything except itself. While all around it, the world made its small and enormous choices about what it was willing to risk. She had risked this. She would risk it again. He pulled her in, and she went, and his coat was cold from the outside and warm from the inside, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt him breathe. And somewhere in the distance, the lights of the island were coming on one by one against the early dark, and the snow kept falling, soft and thin and quiet, the way some things ended. Not with collapse or declaration, but with the steady, simple fact of two people standing still long enough in the same place to finally become home to each other.